If you're writing your findings chapter and you're getting feedback saying things like needs more depth, be more critical, push the analysis further, then you're not alone. This is one of the most common and one of the most frustrating pieces of feedback that PhD students receive. Because nobody tells you what depth actually means or how to be more critical and less descriptive. And if you're working with qualitative data, it can feel especially confusing. You've got interviews, transcripts, field notes, observations, documents. You've worked hard with the data. You've identified themes and patterns. You've written the chapter. And then your supervisor says, needs more depth. Yeah. In this video, I want to explain what that feedback actually means and how to fix it. Also, we need to talk about literature because so many of you ask me, do I need to bring the literature back in my findings chapter? And if I do that, what is then left for the discussion chapter? We'll talk about that too. Once you understand this properly, writing becomes a lot easier. And let's face it, that's what we need at this point in the PhD, isn't it? Because you're tired right now, aren't you? You need to get words on the page. Let's get into it. When your supervisor says that your work is too descriptive or that it needs more depth, what they don't normally mean is that you haven't done enough work or that your data is weak or your themes are wrong. They don't mean that at all. What they probably mean is this. You're telling them what your participants said, but you're not explaining why that matters. That distinction is really important. Description says participants reported feeling unsupported. Analysis says participants' accounts suggest that support was experienced not simply as the presence of help, but as responsiveness at key moments of uncertainty. Can you see the difference there? One reports, one interprets. One repeats the surface, one develops meaning. This is usually what supervisors mean by needs more depth. A lot of PhD students think the findings chapter should simply present the data, present the quotes, and stay neutral. But qualitative findings chapters are usually the place where you're supposed to make your analysis visible. You're showing your readers, so your supervisor and your examiner, what emerged when you worked carefully and systematically with the data. This means moving between the data itself, patterns across the data, and your interpretation of those patterns. Quotes are supporting evidence in the chapter. They are not the chapter itself. Your job is to guide the reader through what those extracts, what those quotes actually reveal. Imagine that your PhD is a museum and you are the guide who is showing your examiner around it. You're explaining what each of the exhibits mean and why they're important, and why they belong in this particular part of the analysis. Here's a simple method to help you add depth immediately. After every paragraph in your findings chapter, ask these questions. What does this show beyond this individual quote? Why might this matter? What broader pattern is emerging here? What is interesting, surprising, contradictory, or significant? How does this relate to my research questions? Many findings chapters stay at the level of description because the researcher gets off the bus one stop early. They present the material, but they don't explain the thinking. They don't complete the circle. Let's look at an example. Let's say you were a PhD researcher studying newly qualified teachers' experiences of interacting with children's parents. Let's say you interviewed 20 early career teachers and one of the participants said this. Sometimes parents email late at night and expect an immediate reply. I worry that if I don't respond quickly, they'll think I'm not taking their child seriously. A lot of PhD researchers would write something like this. Several participants described pressure from parents to respond quickly to communication. One teacher explained that parents emailed late at night and expected immediate replies. Now, there's nothing wrong with this, but it stays quite close to the surface. It tells us what happened, but it doesn't yet develop meaning. A more analytical version with additional depth might read something like this. Several participants described pressure to be constantly available to parents. For newly qualified teachers, communication appeared to extend beyond school hours, creating uncertainty about professional boundaries. Responsiveness was often linked not simply to efficiency, but to concerns about being perceived as competent, committed, and caring. So now we've moved from one quote, one incident, one complaint, to a broader pattern, to what it might mean, to why it matters in this context, and that is depth. Let's now apply those 5 questions to this example. Question number 1, what does this show beyond this individual quote? Well, it shows that it's not just one parent emailing late. It shows that early career teachers experience parental communication as something that is boundaryless, something that is demanding. Question number 2, why might this matter? Well, it matters because it affects workload, stress, confidence, and work-life balance during an already quite vulnerable career stage. Question number 3, what broader pattern is emerging? Well, new teachers might feel that they must be permanently responsive to be seen as legitimate professionals. Question number 4, what is interesting, surprising, contradictory, or significant? So here, although teachers formally hold authority, some of them feel judged and evaluated by the parents, and that reversal is interesting. Question number 5, how does this relate to the research questions? Well, if the study is about experiences of parent interaction, this suggests that those interactions are shaped not just by communication, but by identity, expectations, and emotional pressure. And from looking at these questions, notice what's changed here. I didn't invent anything. I didn't make any wild claims. I simply moved from repeating the quote to interpreting what the quote might reveal about a broader experience. Many PhD findings chapters don't lack depth because the researcher is incapable. They lack depth because the researcher stops at what was said, rather than carrying on to look at what that might show, what that might reveal. Before we move on to the next thing, please get into the comments with your experiences of the findings chapter. What are you struggling with right now? What is stopping you from moving forward? And if you're a seasoned researcher who's done your findings chapter or who's completed a lot of findings chapters across a whole range of different projects, please share your wisdom down there in the comments as well. What do you wish somebody would have told you before you started writing those findings chapters? What would you have done differently? Get typing down there. I reply to every single comment and I am really looking forward to seeing what you write. The literature. Should the literature appear in the findings chapter? Should you revisit any of it here? Or should you save that for the discussion? This is where a lot of people start to spiral because they think, well, if I do put the literature in here, what is then left for the discussion chapter? So let's break this down. There is no single universal model for findings and discussion chapters. No magic formula. Different disciplines, different departments do things differently. Broadly, there are 2 common approaches. Firstly, a completely separate findings and discussion. In the findings chapter, you present what you found, the themes, the patterns, and the evidence from the data. In the discussion chapter, you have a deeper interpretation, links to the literature, theory, implications, and your contribution to knowledge. In the second approach, you've got an integration of the findings and their interpretation. So some disciplines expect you to weave interpretation and literature throughout your findings. Both approaches are completely valid, and the real question isn't which one is correct. The real question is, what does my discipline expect? So ask your supervisor about what's expected in your field of study and go and look at some published theses in your area. If you are going to bring literature into your findings, how do you do that? I would say use the literature lightly and purposefully. Thinking of our example study, it might look something like this. This finding echoes previous research on emotional labour in teaching, where educators manage feelings and relationships alongside formal responsibilities. These accounts extend existing work on teacher identity by showing how professional credibility is negotiated not only with colleagues or senior staff, but also through everyday interactions with parents. Unlike earlier studies that focus mainly on workload, participants here describe responsiveness to parents as linked to fears of being judged as inexperienced or uncaring. This aligns with research on boundary blurring in education, but suggests that newly qualified teachers may experience that pressure particularly intensely during the transition into practice. That is enough. You are locating the finding. You're not writing a second literature review inside the findings chapter. So what is left for the discussion chapter if you've done that in the findings? Well, plenty. The discussion chapter is where you step back and ask these questions. What do these findings mean overall? How do different themes connect? How do they reshape existing literature? What theoretical insight emerges? What contribution does this study make? What are the implications? Your findings chapter said, here's what emerged. Your discussion chapter comes along and says, here's why that matters. That is the distinction that you need to understand. If your findings feel a bit descriptive right now, or you've been told that your analysis needs more depth, that doesn't mean that you're bad at analysis. It often means that you might be a little bit underconfident in your own judgment. You think you need to stay neutral. You're not sure where the interpretive elements belong. And nobody has actually shown you how to connect all of these things and how to write it up. But that is what I really hope that I'm helping you with here on this channel. So if you found this video useful, please do hit subscribe and check out the other video that's appearing on your screen right now. Go and take a look. I'll see you in there.